A town hall special from ABC4 News, A Nation Divided, A Path Forward.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the special edition of our 6 o'clock news. My name is Brittany Johnson. You're joining us for A Nation Divided, A Path Forward. Tonight, we want to have a meaningful discussion about race and justice, but more importantly, we want to discuss the path forward. In studio tonight, Utah Representative Sandra Hollins, former Salt Lake City Mayor Jackie Biskupski, and Dr. LaShawn Williams, a professor of education at Utah Valley University. Thank you all for taking the time to be part of what I think is a very important dialogue. Now, Representative Hollins, let's start with you tonight. What are your thoughts on how things have unfolded in these last 9 days?
You know, in the last 9 days, I sat with everyone else as I watched Mr. Floyd take his last breath on social media and on air. And I was horrified. I was horrified by what I saw. And I understand the protests. I understand people's frustration, and I understand their anger. You know, as a woman of color who have experienced racism in the United States and here in Utah, I can understand why it boiled over into the streets and why people are feeling the way they feel.
Now, do you think America has reached its boiling point?
Absolutely, America has reached its boiling point. The death of Mr. Floyd was just the tip of the iceberg. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, but this has been brewing for quite a while.
Now, before the George Floyd incident, there was Philando Castile, shot by a police officer while pulled over during a traffic stop. Jamar Clark, shot by police who responded to a paramedic call. Christopher Burns, who was strangled when 2 officers used a chokehold. And David Smith was restrained by officers before he died. These were all black people killed by police officers in or near Minneapolis. Now, for this, I do want to bring in our former mayor, Jackie Biskupski. Now, before you were here in Salt Lake City, like I said, you grew up in the Minneapolis area, so this all happening where you are from. Yeah. So I want to talk about racial inequality and police brutality there in that community and others, even right here in Utah, something we've been fighting for decades. What do you see is the racial divide, or is the divide between the black community and law enforcement?
Well, I think it stems from what we know as our culture. You know, everyone at my age has grown up in a culture and a society that is completely racist. And we want to believe that it isn't, because we've all gone along to get along and we've benefited from it. But the reality of it is, we created this manifestation of police brutality because of the system, and we have not addressed it properly.
And what do we need to do to address this properly?
Well, I think first you do what I did when I was mayor, and that is you meet with the community and you listen. You work to affect change. You do training differently. You do de-escalation training. It becomes mandatory. But we have more to do than just with our police officers. Yes, that is a crux of this issue, but Trayvon Martin was not murdered by a police officer. And so we have to recognize that there are murders of black people happening by citizens and residents, not just law enforcement.
Now, Dr. Williams, a lot of people might find these images to be disturbing that we're seeing right now all over our TV screens, all over social media being posted. How can people deal with the images that they're seeing right now?
Well, one of the things to do is to understand the effect of the trauma response. Oftentimes you have a window of tolerance where you can deal with just about anything. Your body responds from a state of calm. You have the skill set to handle the information and the difficulties that arise when you see violent images or images in general. What we're running the risk of is the desensitization of seeing so many violent images of black people taking their last breaths on screen. So for some people, it's healthy to disconnect from watching the images. For others, they need the exposure to see it and to actually feel connected to it, to understand that there were moments before and that there will be moments after where we honestly have to dig deep and to say, do I represent this? Am I connected to this? For myself as a clinician and having worked in different settings where I have to do similar holds as to the police officers so far as defensive tactics or therapeutic holds, being associated with a hold that takes someone's life is disgusting. And so for those of us in helping professions, for those of us who know that our children are going to schools where they're interacting with police officers and wondering, will this also be me? And then what will people do? We have to deal with the images because they're people's lived realities and there are lived experiences. The question is, do we want this to continue to be our lived experience?
Thank you for that. And I do want to go back to Representative Hollins to ask you this question. What is the disconnect between police and the Black communities in your eyes that they patrol?
I think the biggest disconnect right now is fear. There is a fear of the Black community that somehow we are these monsters. And because of that, I think the interaction is different than it is in the white communities. With C-19 that is going on, I've been hearing stories of a lot of, in particular, Black men who are refusing to wear their masks because of the fear of wearing their mask and what that's going to mean. And if the police are going to be called, what is going to happen is that going to be an interaction that they're going to get out of alive. And so I think all of this is based on fear and not taking the time to get to know the community in which you're serving.
That brings up a good point that I want each of you to weigh in on. When I was out there at the protests that were happening, some are happening right now in Salt Lake City, I heard people saying, going across the police officers, you don't look like me, you don't look like me, you don't look like me, I don't know you. What's the importance of having police officers in the community, we'll go to Jackie Biskupski on this, that know their community?
Sure, absolutely. You know, we certainly were doing community policing heavily, trying to get our law enforcement team back into the neighborhoods so that they could get to know that neighborhood and become a part of it. There are probably several issues, though, that have to be addressed, and a lot of it is hiring practices. Hiring practices within law enforcement, hiring practices all over in this country that have really created this huge gap between the people who have and the people who have not. And the reality of it is the have-nots are people of color almost always. And that has been systemic and forever. It goes way back in our society, and we have never righted that wrong, and we need to do that. That's part of the change that has to happen.
All right, thank you for that. We're gonna head to our break right now. Community leaders condemn violence amid protest over the death of George Floyd. What's the solution here? What is the right way to call for change? The panel discussion continues after the break. Welcome back. In our first segment, we addressed the problem. Now we are talking about solutions. And our panel is back with us. Representative Sandra Hollins, former Salt Lake City Mayor Jackie Biskupski, and Dr. LaShawn Williams, a doctor of education at Utah Valley University. Now, people, they're fed up. They're angry, tired of seeing history repeat itself, tired of not getting solutions. Dr. Williams, how do people deal with this discontent?
They recognize that this is another opportunity for change. We're talking about our societal identity as a country, and every single flashpoint that we have with violence like this, with the expectations that there will be outrage and then that there will be back to normal, we have to decide that we're going to create a new normal. We have to use discontent as an opportunity for conflict and as an opportunity for creative and constructive conflict, and we have to use our ability to engage each other across differences, to respect those differences, to be vulnerable, to respect that vulnerability and to support it so that we can honestly change our societal identity. We have our growth process to really engage in, and we can no longer sit and be okay with discontent passing along. We have to say this is enough and we need a new normal.
Now, a question that I would like each of you to answer: who or what is going to calm the situation? We'll start with you, Representative Hollins.
Sure. I think we need to start with listening. As an elected official, I think sometimes we get caught up in our own agenda that we fail to listen to the community. We fail to listen to what the issues are. And for me, I think that's where we have to start. the people who are out there protesting, they feel that they're not being heard. They feel that we're not understanding their experiences. And so I think that's where we as lawmakers need to start. And then after we listen, we need to start creating policy around what we are learning from these individuals, policies that's going to support equality and equity.
And former mayor, would you like to answer that question too?
Sure. You know, there are many spokes in the wheel of racism and discrimination, and I think leaders absolutely have to start looking at each one individually and coming up with solutions on how to end that practice or that history of ours, and come together in a way that they are listening. They are also creating significant change. We're not talking about small change. We need very big change in this country, and it has to come from the top down.
And Dr. Williams, will you please answer that question as well?
Validation. You can't calm someone down trying to convince them that they need to calm down. You need to validate why they're upset. You need to hear and understand and say, I understand why that upset you. I understand why that hurt you. You need to apologize. You need to reconcile. Find some sort of a way that beyond saying, who's going to calm us down? Who's going to help correct this? How can I validate the feelings of people who are feeling unheard, and how can I hear them? Once I hear them, then yeah, we can start calming down. But when the body is in fight or flight response, you can't tell someone to calm down until you validate them and coach them through the process and be willing to bring something to the table different than what's ever been brought before, to say, here's how I'm going to make this different, and I promise to do this with you, not for you. I promise because this is wrong, this should not have happened, and I have the power, the access, the resources, and the ability and the staying power to make this right. When it's made right, then people can calm down. But trying to have folks calm down now to make you feel better, that's not going to be the way that it happens.
So sticking with you, Dr. Williams, how can people be allies? So many people have reached out across social media, just even calling me, friends of mine, saying, how can we help? How can we be allies?
In order to be an ally, the idea is you need to understand who you are. If you haven't done your own work around your place and your position in the history of our country and the history of your own racial identity, you can't be an ally. What are you an ally for? What are you going to help? Are you doing it to help you feel better, or are you doing it to actually change? If you're doing it to change, you actually don't need to ask me any questions. You need to understand that fighting against white supremacy and fighting against racism is the right thing to do because those things are wrong. You don't do them because this black person is my friend, or this black person is my partner, or this black person is my child. I'm doing this because anti-black violence, anti-black racism is wrong, and whether I'm connected to a black person, whether I want to be an ally or not, I'm doing the right thing. There are plenty of examples in history of white people who did the right thing because it was the right thing to do. And if you want to quote Martin Luther King, where he says the time is always right to do what is right, then do what's right. Don't look for a reason to be an ally, just do the right thing.
All right, that's going to do it for us this block, but we have much more coming up after the break.
Like I said, I'm not big into politics, but if that's the system we're going to live in, we need to show up at our city hall meetings, and we need to put that foot forward. If you can vote, vote. Like, we have to get these politicians out that condone this kind of thing.
Protesters calling on each other to get to city hall meetings, register voters, not only to vote in the presidential election, but local elections. Now, I've seen people tweet about attending their very first city hall meeting this week. A friend of mine waited almost 4 hours to vote in D.C. yesterday. People saying they are fed up and are marching to the polls for change. Now, for change, Utah's primary election comes up on June 30th. So, Representative Hollins, there are still some people who don't buy into our political system. Does voting in your local elections have as much impact as protesting?
Absolutely. I tell people, and particularly young people, that protesting is good. I love a protest. I think protest sends a very powerful message. Yet we have to look beyond the protest. What are we going to be doing? And I think one of the main tools that we have is to vote. Historically, communities of color and black communities in particular have had a very low voter turnout. And so we sit at home and we allow other people to elect who should be in office, and most of the time those people don't reflect our values. And so it is very, very important that this election, more than any other election, that we get out and vote.
Now, I heard this quote the other day: politicians have the power to make the change. We have the power to press them to do it. As former mayor, you do know what it takes to win a race. Former Mayor Jackie Biskupski, how important is it for a candidate to be in touch with what's going on in the world right now and address these issues in their platform?
Well, I think first you have to start with addressing the voter oppression that occurs every election cycle in this country. And one, believe that it's happening and then do something about it. You can see our president is frantically running around trying to stop the ability of people to vote by mail nationwide, which of course people should be able to do that. One of the ways that we keep people from voting is by stacking people up in these massive lines and then close the box before people have a chance to vote in person. So, you know, we have to stop that systemic problem in our society so that people can vote and bring the change they're looking for.
All right, we have 5 minutes left, and as we take this time, I want to move the conversation forward. I want to know everyone's call to action tonight. We'll start with you, Doctor.
I think my call to action is to get involved. There's always something that you can do. And if you are a parent like I am and you have children that are in the K-12 system, get involved in your classrooms, get involved on curriculum, get involved in hiring, get on your student community council, get involved at the level that you have to be impacted on every single day, because your children are impacted every single day. Children are going to school and they're hearing racial slurs and they're having to try and defend themselves, and not only that, but also educate their educators. Parents, it's on us to get involved. That's it. You have to get involved. You have to do something, and you have to do something somewhere soon. I
want to follow up on a point you just made. Students are having to educate their educators. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, when there are problematic lessons that happen in the classroom. The ones that we've seen most frequently in the last year are math lessons relating to enslavement and the transatlantic slave trade. We've had students that have to deal with the discussion around the N-word and other slurs. And when teachers are not feeling confident or competent to have these conversations, our students, our children, my children, Black children, brown children, end up educating their teachers. They're not on the payroll. My tax dollars are going to help my educators, my teachers do that work. Support the educators who are saying, let's do curricular review. Support the educators that are trying to get anti-racist curriculum into the classroom. Pilot it somewhere if you can't do it at the district level, but get it in a classroom. Get started. It's past time.
All right, thank you for that. We're going to move on to former Mayor Jackie Biskupski. What is your call to action?
You know, I want people to start by believing that things are happening in this country, murders are happening in this country that are not justified, and that oppression, that discrimination, that all of these systemic problems in our society are real, and that they should step forward, raise their hand to do the work that has to get done in order for us to have the kind of country we believe we live in, but we really don't.
Okay, and Representative Hollins, we'll leave you with the last word tonight.
Sure. I just want to echo what Dr. Williams said. Get involved and be aware of what's going on in your community. But I also want to make sure everyone understands that change don't happen overnight. If you choose to be a part of this fight for change, you cannot get out there and then 6 months later say, well, it didn't happen, so I'm done. Change happens over time, and we have to fight over and over again. And sometimes we lose a battle, sometimes we win the battle. But the key is we have to stay on this battlefield.
And speaking of that, change doesn't happen overnight. What you've been working on for a couple years now is a resolution to remove the word slavery from the Constitution.
Yes.
That is something that's also going to be something that voters can vote on to remove that from the Constitution.
Yes.
Can you Talk about that tonight.
Absolutely. HJR 8 is going to be on the ballot this November, and what it does is it moves the slavery out of our Utah Constitution. Many people were surprised to find that it's still in the Constitution. And we know slavery is the root of all this. It's the root of everything that's happened. What we're seeing now is still the fallout and the result of slavery. So in order to move forward, we first got to remove that from our language, out of our Constitution, and then we can, as we start addressing other issues in this state.
And did you receive a lot of support for that bill? I know it passed unanimously. Did you receive a lot of support, though, from that?
I did. I received a lot of support from that bill, and a lot of people have been contacting me saying, how do I push this forward? Tell me what you need from me to push this forward.
Okay, and former Mayor Jackie Biskupski, I want to ask you about that as well, since you have been in this process. Should we be having to have this discussion right now to remove the word slavery from our Constitution?
Well, it's unfortunate that we do have to have it, but Representative Hollins is absolutely right. That word is still in our Utah Constitution. We need to get rid of it. I want people to understand, though, and this was a discussion I had today with a friend, that there are so many of us who look at our ancestry and we don't see shackles, and there are so many of us who do. And that is something we have to right.
All right, you guys, the conversation does not end here. So much more of this is going to be taking place. We're going to have more episodes of this, so reach out to me if you want to be on this panel. So again, thank you to you three for joining us tonight, and to you guys for joining us online and watching this for A Nation Divided, A Path Forward. If you want to join the discussion, email me, bjohnson@abc4.com.